Everest couldn't sleep. Absently staring into the ceiling above her head, her mind just refused to quiet the static screeching into her ears. Sky was gone, a piece of her life that she would never get back. Staring with a sunken expression, Everest never realized how much she treasured a memory till now. She clung on to the old flickers of their time together, replaying them over and over in her head, as if the dream alone would never give those feelings happiness back. Denial had plagued her quickly, Zuma's words writing over themselves and changing the story. Desperately, Everest wanted to be the author of this terrible nightmare. She could rise out of her body, grip Zuma by the throat, and change his own words. But she couldn't. This was really her reality, a cold truth that only sunk her deeper into the gray-scaled mind. Just bring Sky back, Everest begged in her mind, tears forming in her eyes. Just make this terrible night go away and never come back. She wanted to melt onto the floor, fitting an escape with a terribly cruel world, although her mind carried cruelty of its own. Everest tossing and turning onto her sides as she fought to sleep. Came a low grumble, and the husky turning over onto her stomach again. Flickering her eyes up, she spotted her pup pad on the tablet sitting on the floor a few inches away. The idea of playing games at a time like this only brought exhaustion to her mind, and she looked away from her device disdainfully. Tablet. Everest sat up in her bed, her mind collecting the dots as she remembered something. The device she had found at the outpost. If it was never going to finish uploading, it would be now. No way in hell that thing would still need time. Everest glanced over at her door, wondering if she could slip out. Anticipation danced in her head, eyes flickering at that off, finally unlocking whatever mysteries it had thing held. For so long, Jake had waved it off, treating her like it was some garbage she had picked up off the street. Her wonder quickly faded into frustration. Everything she had worked for was slowly being robbed out of her paws. Her owner, her lounge, her hobbies, her work, it all made a growl vibrate through her teeth. It wasn't fair, she thought to herself. She deserved this. She was owed the fruits of her labor. She wanted to see what was on that damn thing, whether Jake liked it or not. Climbing out of bed, she placed her paws on the cold wood floor as drive brew in her head. There was no way she'd get sleep now. The journey began. Everest peeked out of her room and saw how close she clear, slipping out into the dark hallway. Her excitement only grew with each step, quickening into a small trot as she made her way to Jake's computer room. She stopped suddenly in the middle of her mission, walking up an obstacle on the path. Ugh, she groaned, twisting her nose at the article of clothing. It was a leather jacket, brown and sharp-collared. She recognized it, and immediately it was belonging to Gasket. As if sight alone didn't confirm it, the reeking stench of gasoline and machine oil radiating from the leather did. How peachy, Everest grumbled, scrunching up her face in disgust. Just leave your clothes wherever you want. All right with me. Unceremoniously, kicking the jacket aside, Everest continued forward. Gently nudging the door open, Everest glanced inside the room. Sure enough, it was empty. The computer table stood like a totem, sitting up like it was somehow the most interesting thing in the room. Computers, human ones at least, were no interest to Everest. The keyboards had too many buttons anyway. She dismissed the human technology, her eyes instead trailing to a set of cords plugged into the side, forming a colorful network that ended her object of interest, the recovered tablet from the outpost. Jake had fixed it finally, a revelation that made Everest roll her eyes. If this guy wasn't so absorbed in pointless towers, he could probably get more important things done every day. Like playing frisbee with me, Everest said out loud, continuing off her thoughts. Or maybe she glanced aside and walked up to the computer, not hiring sketchy-ass bikers to invade my bed. She gave her body a small wiggle, prepping the jump, and leapt off the floor, planting her front paws on the edge of the table. The husky grunted as she heaved herself up. Easy, she chuckled, shaking to herself off and stepping on the keyboard. She grabbed the tablet and dropped the pup tree snatching it hungrily like a most prized information in the world was kept. Sure enough, the screen was replaced with a bunch more hardware that had been either fixed or swapped out for new variants. Her curiosity was piqued by the screen's glow, and repairing finally after all this time was finished. It was fully usable now, great excitement spreading across her face as she held it. She took the tablet in her paws, sitting on the floor. Took you long enough. There better be something worthwhile on this thing, Everest said with a grumble, accessing the newly replaced touchscreen. She didn't truly know what she'd been expecting. A goldmine of information would be nice, or perhaps a few mobile games to captivate her attention for the next few hours. Anything wasn't plastered behind the passcode was good enough anyway. Unfortunately, that canceled out a large portion of its contents. Damn it, was the only phrase she repeated several times, going through file after file only to be met with the passcode requirement. Her face twisted in agitation as her pulse swipes became more aggressive, bristling her fur as she fought against the machine. A vault of documents was the last thing she accessed, a flat resignation already painting her face as she prepared to her arm to chuck the useless tablet across the room. She was met with an unexpected sight, her eyes widening just by a hair, a screen of pages, notes of that sort, all organized in a list from top to bottom. They were all tilted with numbers, devoid of any more interesting details. Everest tilted her head and raised an eyebrow, briefly glancing around the room. The feeling of accessing sensitive information was making her anxious, heightening her senses as if she were someone hiding in the room with her. To her immense disappointment, a large majority of the documents were also taunting her behind the passcodes. Except one. The note was lifted as draft, unfinished and unpolished, likely due for a passcode soon, but never saw the light of day. "All right," she said, hope tightening her voice. "Surprise me." Thinking nothing, Everest accessed the note. "Observation report," said the title in bold letters. "Number 4-digit 485009. It was signed with the name Dutch. Likely whoever oversaw that writing. Everest tapped her paw, racking her brain for anyone who could have possibly known that name, but only blank fog came in response. "Transportation was becoming dangerous the longer we wait," said the report. "To ensure the safety of both specimens and ourselves, we can only ship them out as soon as possible. Subjects in question were only as docile as they chose to be. We must act now if the plan shall come into fruition." "Plan?" Everest said, narrowing her eyes. She continued reading with a puzzled expression. The words grew curious, as if the writer was leaning back in his chair, gazing up in the ceiling of contemplation. It read, "We have made a fascinating discovery considering the Manjargar creature. It carries a unique ability to blend the phototropism of its cells, somehow cloaking itself until completely vanishes from the naked eye. We need a better way to track this thing because it keeps turning invisible on us. Several times we had fought it escaped containment when it was fully right in front of us. Our interests aside, the creature seemed to hunt for bodies and wear protective gear like armor. But we have witnessed it commit rather brutal acts in our test subjects. But that being said, the Manjargar is scheduled for release in the mountains. More information will come then." "The mountains?" Everest looked up, blinking. "But that's here." An uneasy chill tickled up her back, shaking her paws as she looked around in the empty room. The warm protection of the ski lounge seemed to vanish, and Everest felt her breathing begin to shake. "All in my mind," she said, voice barely above whisper. "It's all just in my head. I'm alone, purely alone." Gulping her fears down, she dragged her vision back down to her reading material. She could finish it, and then run back to her bed. Her head was already mapping out the route. The tablet continued. "We have a little information on what the Varrock's mouths can become, with the writing said, fear slipping through the digital ink. We only know it's predatory by nature, showing an industrial desire to kill and eat. It appears to mimic the physical form of whatever it will last consume. and we've taken notice of worms that appear to be attracted to its presence. The insects bear no resemblance to any kind of documented organism. We must assume that they are connected in some way. For now, the Varrock's Malice predator must be released in Venture Bay. Monitoring will continue from there. The husky drew back. Adventure Bay? Her eyes widened, the tablet completely dropping from her paws. She sprang up in all fours, adrenaline coursing through her veins. I have to warn them. I have to call Chase, call Ryder, any of them. She slapped on her paw on the machine, trying to find its call feature, only to realize there wasn't one. Damn it! Paws frantically scrambled at the wood as she flung her body around, the dog breaking into a full sprint, crashing out the room. The husky skidded to the floor as she charged through the dark, where she had left her own tablet. Maybe there's still time. What it's called? Varrock's something? Voice bouncing off the walls of the dark lounge. Everest crossed the top of the stairs in seconds, her heartbeat supercharged as blood raced through the body. She ran with everything her body had. Knocking the cracked door aside, Everest jumped from where she had left her device. Wait, she stopped suddenly, her heart sinking. Well, what? Her pup pad was destroyed. A large hole tore through the center of the machine, as if a solid object had completely penetrated through it, shattering the screen with mangling its inner components. How did... Everest paled before the fractured device. She sputtered out a few mess of overlapping words. Not a single incoherent thought could form itself. She had only been gone for 5 minutes at most. How could this have happened? A fierce shiver ran up her veins as an unnerving sound crept into her ears. A faint rattling noise floated in her head, either creaking bones or a fiery rattlesnake. It was close yet distant. If real, but real, she felt something heavy and wet hit her shoulder, making her jump from the cold splash. She screamed and shook her body with all of her might. A clear saliva-like liquid flinging off her body. Wordless cries choked up her throat as she looked around frantically for the source of the fluid. Ah! Looking up at the ceiling, she saw nothing more but the lifeless wood above her. Her mind was only default to one cry. Jake! She barked, screaming for her owner. Jake! Jake, where are you? Heart pounding, breath shaking, paws scrambling, Everest leaped out from her room and ran for the stairway. Her speed betrayed her feet, and the husky lost her footing at the top of the stairs. An agonizing assault belonged her as she fell, jagged edges slamming into her bones. She took a blow to the skull, her vision blurring over as the world spun around her. Sharp bruises formed on her body as she hit the tiled floor below, the door crumbling into agonizing groans. She laid on the floor for what felt like an hour, slowly waiting for her body to stop aching. After a while, she grimaced and fought to stand up. Jake! She barked into the blurry abyss, pushing herself up against her sore legs. Her eyes watered against the pain, mixing with the streaked crimson of red leaking from her nose. Help me! Screaming into the darkness of the lounge, she backed herself into a corner and shook herself of the disoriented state. The sound of wrestling pots and pans echoed throughout the lower floor, originating from the kitchen. Everest whipped around at the noise, a light hope coming to her spirits. It was Jake. It had to be. It was always him with the late-night snacks. It was him. It had to be him. Jake! Everest choked on her words, sprinting as fast as she could go for the kitchen. Jake, something's wrong. The Paw Patrol's in danger. We need to... She rounded the corner, sliding on the dirty tile, and came to an abrupt stop. Her breath seized, eyes widening at the petrified stare as she saw him. Hubcap. He was levitating, floating in midair as if it were suspended by invisible wires. Everest thought she was hallucinating, her mind spinning from the earlier fall, but a gurgled cry emitted from the bulldog was too real. A gaping hole had blown through Hubcap's chest, sprays of red coating the kitchen floor and draining from his lethal wound. His face was paralyzed with terror, eyes rolling into the back of his skull as blood bubbled up in his throat. He was hung in the air like a crude puppet, suspended on nothing as if he were flying. What? Everest choked, paralyzed in fear. How? A feral hiss, echoed in the kitchen, catching her by surprise. What sounded like an animalistic snarl bounced off the walls, roaring in agitation. Hubcap's body lurched violently, the sickening crack of bone piercing the air, and another splash of red was regurgitated from its throat. The blood painted down his chest, exposing the invisible spear-shaped appendage shoved through his body as the bulldog's corpse gruesomely slid off the undetectable weapon. The object sharply waved itself to flick the blood off until it violently vanished from view. Everest recoiled as she was sprayed red across the face, screaming in panic as she took herself off of Hubcap's remains. There was a third creature in the room. The sound of scratching claws tapped along the ceilings. Walking forward with a feral snarl filled the air. Everest frantically darted her gaze at every corner of the kitchen to try and identify the creature. But she saw nothing but the crimson painted title of the room, the sound of rattling bones slithering formlessly in the air, and a rising screech shattering the once silent atmosphere of the lounge. Her paralyzed stare, Everest began fearfully creeping backwards. She could smell the malice, the sadism, the reeking clouds of blood in the air. She couldn't see it, but she smelled it, heard it. She knew it was there. It was looking at her from where it clung, staring down at her with its taunting grin. Shaking her head of blood splatters, Everest had turned and fled in the improvised direction. Her trauma had her stop thinking, panic clouding an irrational thought. She was screaming blood murder, her body flattened as she dove under the tables and fled down the hallways. She only stopped once her stamina had completely drained. The husky slowly went to a rough halt in the wall. She was hyperventilating so abrasively that it felt like her lungs would choke out any moment. Puddles of sweat emanating from her paws that tracked behind her. Looking behind herself, she checked warily to see if she had been followed, vision jumping around in the empty darkness of the hallway. Gulping down her stomach acid that threatened to spew from her mouth, Everest began walking backwards as she stared down the passageway. Slowly her breathing began to slow, and the silence of the lounge beginning to encompass her. It was a dream. It was just a dream, she whimpered in her mind. It was all just one terrible nightmare. A twist and drawn-out nightmare she would wake up from any moment. Any moment, she breathed, backing into a wall. A brief sound of coiling bone whipped in the air, prickling Everest's ears. Then penetrating shock tore through her body, an invisible appendage spearing into her leg with electrifying speed. The husky screamed into the darkness as the skin on her leg rippled aside. Thigh muscle bifurcating and open with a sickening paper-like tear. Blood splattered on the floor as triumph screech echoed through the air, like the spearhead was pulled in an instant, flinging back like a yanked leash. A trail of red splashed through the hallway, a distorted laugh mocking Everest's agony. The husky collapsed into a puddle of red, the excessive screaming mere moments from tearing her vocal cords. She buckled under her crippled limb, sadistic laughter howling over her. Her drive for self-preservation seized her, spiking adrenaline through her in her veins as she gripped her paws onto the floor and began dragging herself away. Gargled cries and whimpers followed her every move, the bloodied leg trailing crimson streak behind her. Teeth clenching, claws scratching the wood, Everest desperately pulled herself across the floor in an attempt to flee. Eyes were staring at her back. Two leering pupils watched in amusement, a wide mouth grinning at the puppy's agony. The final blow never came, and Everest managed to shove open a door and pulled herself into an old storage room. The entire path of blood had been painted behind her, a thin width, but shining but still energized glow. With a final push, she made it to the side and kicked the door closed. Frantically, she grabbed the cardboard boxes and flung them down, spilling their contents out on the floor. Flinging them with the mindless objects aside, she spotted an old towel, stained and hardened with age. Without a thought, she snatched it and quickly wrapped it around her legs as tightly as she could. Ah! Screams of pain forced her up her throat as she pulled the fabric tight, the force so immense that it felt her teeth would break. She soon lost a feeling in her wounded leg, the bleeding obstructed but not mended. She sharply turned back to the boxes, tossing whatever she didn't need aside. Unearthing a small plastic box, the husky tore off the lid, revealing several small pill bottles. It was Jake's, or at least the box itself belonged to him. He didn't take the medicine. It was all meant for the sick dog that visited a few months ago. Even after he left, the pills and the medicines Jake gave him stayed behind. Everest grabbed a bottle of ibuprofen pills and assaulted the top with her paw. Ah, fuck! She howled in pain, fumbling with the childproof lid. Angered and impatient, she bared her teeth and bit into the bottle, wraggling her teeth through the plastic. It finally gave way, the top dislodging from the bottle, and sending her recoiling backwards. Dozens of pink pills exploded out and crashed onto the floor like broken glass. Spitting out the plastic in her mouth, Everest swept her arm on the floor and grabbed as many as she could, swallowing them down in 5 doses an instant. It wasn't enough. She spotted a tiny glass bottle of liquid morphine, thrown onto the floor in her haste to unbox the items. A medical syringe just happened to land right next to her, as if the universe itself was already confirming what she had to do. Hating every moment she made, she grabbed the bottle in her paw and the syringe in her teeth, sticking its needle through the cap. Her free paw used to draw back the tool, absorbing the medicine into its capsule. Gritting her teeth, she held out her arm and furiously scanned her eyes over it, trying to locate a vein. She had no medical experience. Everest could only give it her best shot. Feeling the vein under her fur, the husky hesitated, stopping at the needle above her arm, as her mind instinctively halted in action. Wincing the pain from her leg, she studied the syringe as much as she could until the needle just was directly touching the arm. She cried out, pushing the thin needle through her skin. She felt it poke into her vein, piercing through only the outer layer as she did her best to keep it from shaking. In a quick motion, she pressed down on the back of the tool, and the liquid morphine was forcibly shot into her bloodstream. Immediately tearing out the needle and tossing it aside, Everest felt her head get dizzy, her body numbing over the pain as it faded. Gulping the newly formed rock in her throat, the puppy stumbled and fell disoriented into her rear. Her breathing slowed, her heartbeat calming, and gradually the world stopped spinning. The pain melted away. The medicine was working quickly to drape a blanket over her wounds. "Jake!" she cried out, rocking back and forth while tightly holding herself. "Help me! Someone help me!" But there was no response. No single sound to answer her in the dead winter night. She was all alone.
What's up, my pretties? It's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video, and I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new, ring the bell for notifications to when I upload so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel, known as Miss Dark Shigo, feel free to subscribe to it, as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, please stay pretty.